Hello there, my name is Darren Sherm. I'm a lead tutor here at UNT's Learning Center. Today I'm going to be covering some important concepts covered in Spanish 1010, such as adjectives, present tense conjugations, and some irregular tenses. Let's begin. As you may know, nouns in Spanish have a gender that is either masculine or feminine. The door is la puerta, and the book is el libro. When using adjectives to describe these nouns, the adjective gender must agree as well. When adjectives end in O, they will change to an A if the noun it is describing is feminine. An example of this is serio. The sentence is, the man is serious, will translate to, el hombre es serio. This would still end in an O because the man is masculine. If I said, the woman is serious, I would translate that to, la mujer es seria. Here you can see that the ending changed to match the gender. On the other hand, some adjectives end in E, such as sociable. In this case, the gender will not change the ending. Sociable will always end in E, no matter what the noun's gender is. Something important to add is that adjectives change according to the amount of nouns they are describing as well. If there is ever a plurality to the noun being described, such as los libros or las puertas, the adjective will need an S added to the end. If I said the men are serious, I would need to make the adjective plural by adding an S to the end of serio. This created los hombres son serios. If the adjective ends in a consonant, ES is added to the end. Unlike English, Spanish adjectives are placed after the noun they describe. In English, you would say the red house, where the adjective red describes the noun house. In Spanish, you would say la casa rojas, with the adjective after casa. An exception to this rule occurs with the adjectives mucho, a lot, poco, few, and varios, several. These adjectives are placed before the noun they describe. There are lots of classes is hay muchas clases. This ordering differs from the usual order you see in Spanish and looks more like how you would phrase the sentence in English. In English, we need both the pronoun and the verb to clarify who is doing the action. In Spanish, conjugations work very different. In Spanish, there is the infinitive form of the verb, which would mean to do something. For example, hablar is to talk. The infinitive form is identified, and the ending, which will be AR, ER, or IR, will be dropped. The end is then replaced with a specific Spanish conjugation that gives subject, tense, and the action being done. The pronouns that coordinate with the conjugations are used to help determine which ending should be used. Here is a chart showing each of the pronouns that you will use. As I said before, adjectives will end in AR, ER, or IR. Here are some examples of AR verbs. If we look at the infinitive, hablar, we know to drop the AR, but what do we replace it with? This chart will show the corresponding endings for each pronoun. For the yo or I form of the verb, the ending added will be O, so I talk will translate to hablo. The to or you form adds an AS, creating hablas. El ella usted, or he, she, you formal is an A, creating habla. The nosotros or we form creates hablamos, and the ellos, ellas, ustedes form, or they, creates hablan. Each of these endings, once added to the verb, gives subject, tense, and obviously still the verb itself. Here are some example sentences. I talk with my mom is hablo con mi madre. They dance a lot is bailan mucho. Now we're going to look at ER verbs. Comer, which means to eat, is a good example to start with. We'll conjugate using the same method we used for hablar, except now we will end with the corresponding endings for ER. For the yo or I form of the verb, the ending added will be an O, so I would translate to como. The to or you form adds an ES, creating comes. El, e, usted, or he, she, and you formal is an E, creating come. The nosotros or we form creates comemos. And the ellos, ellas, ustedes form, or they, creates comen. The present tense conjugations for IR are almost the exact same as ER, except for the nosotros form is slightly different. Let's conjugate escribir. We have escribo, escribes, escribe, then escribimos, and escriben. Now that we have covered all of the regular verbs for the present tense, let us talk about a couple of categories called stem changers. Stem changers end the same way as the regular counterparts, but the beginning of the verbs are slightly altered. There are three main categories of stem changers: O to UE, E to I, and E to IE. Let's look at some examples of O to UE. Dormir, which means to sleep, is a stem changing IR verb. All of the endings are the exact same as all regular IR verbs. However, now the O changes to a UE in every form except for the nosotros form. Now let's look at an E to IE stem changer. Commonly used verb to use with this is preferir, which means to prefer. This is a stem changing IR verb as well. You can see the endings are exactly the same except for now the E has changed to an IE in all forms except the nosotros. An example of E to I that does this is repetir, which means to repeat. You can see that the changes hold the same way in this verb as well. Fortunately, not all verbs end exactly the same despite their endings in the infinitive form. Some verbs are irregular. The verb gustar is not conjugated the same way as the typical AR verb. The end of gustar only changes based on the number of things you are talking about. Instead of the end of gustar being changed, me, te, le, nos, or les are added to the beginning to clarify who is doing the liking. If I want to say I like something singular, I would say me gusta, but if what I am liking is plural, I would say me gustan. The to form would be te gusta, gustan. The LAO stead form is le gusta, gustan. We, nos, gusta, gustan. And they, les gusta, gustan. Tener, which means to have, is another common irregular that is part stem changer, part yo irregular. If we look at the yo form, a normal ER verb would simply end in O. For tener, we change the whole ending to form tengo. Then the rest of the conjugations act like a normal E to IE stem changer. Tú tienes, ustedes tienen, nosotros tenemos, and ellos, ellas, ustedes tienen. Tener is an irregular verb that is frequently used. Sometimes when it is used very literally. Tener means to have, and the expressions shown are also used with it, even though you would not necessarily say it that way in English. For example, tener años literally would translate to English as to have so many years, but in reality it means to be however many years old. Another important irregular is ir, which means to go. This irregular changes a lot. As you can see, the conjugations are voy, vas, va, vamos, and van. Something important about this verb is that it can be used to say I go with voy, or it can be used to form present progressive. The present progressive is the I'm going to do something form in English. This is formed by ir plus a plus an infinitive. The verb ir is conjugated to specify who is doing the action. Then the actual action itself is left in the infinitive form after an a. If I were to say I am going to eat, I would conjugate ir to voy, then add the a, then leave comer in its infinitive form, creating voy a comer. Our last two irregulars are ser and estar. These both mean to be. In English, you would say I am, you are, he is, etc., no matter what the context, and not need to differentiate. In Spanish, there are certain situations where you use ser versus estar. First, we'll look at the conjugations since they are irregular. Ser is conjugated to soy, eres, es, somos, and son. Estar is conjugated similar to an AR for the most part, but it has some slight differences. It is conjugated to estoy, estás, está, estamos, and están. You can see that there are accents on some of the forms except for the nosotros, and the yo form has a y at the end. Now that we have seen the conjugations for these verbs, we need to determine when we should use them. The simplest way to think of it is saying what I was taught. For how you feel and where you are, always use the verb estar. This is because emotions and current location both fall under estar. Anything other than that will fall under ser. Ser is most commonly used for more permanent things such as occupation, character traits, and origin. A common example of the difference are the questions, where are you versus where are you from? You would use a star to describe where you are currently. Your origin, or where you are from, would require the verb ser. Now, with all of the information you have heard today, here's a short review of important things we covered. Adjectives must agree with the gender and the plurality of the thing they are describing. Adding an S to the end of adjectives makes it plural, and certain adjectives require a change from the masculine O to the feminine A. Adjectives in Spanish are generally placed after the nouns they describe, except for mucho, poco, and varios. When conjugating verbs in Spanish, you take the infinitive form and drop the AR, ER, or IR. Then you replace the endings with the corresponding form. The AR endings are O, as, a, amos, an. The ER endings are O, es, e, emos, en. The IR endings are O, es, e, imos, en. When conjugating in stem changers, there are three different types: O to UE, E to I, and E to IE. These verb changes occur in all forms except the nosotros. And don't forget, for how you feel and where you are, always use the verb estar. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helped you get a better idea of the key concept in Spanish 1010. Feel free to check out some of our other resources here at the Learning Center located in Sage Hall, room 170.